When my father told me he wouldn't help with my college tuition, he didn't say it with sadness or regret or even mild discomfort. He said it the way a CEO rejects a mediocre proposal. Cold. Efficient. Painless. College isn't for everyone, he said, with that crisp tone he used during board meetings. And frankly, Rachel, I'm not convinced you're ready for that level of commitment. I blinked at him from across the long polished dining table, where the sunlight always hit his face in a way that made him look permanently confident. What does that mean? I asked. He folded his napkin with surgical precision. It means, he said, I'm not wasting money on a gamble. A gamble. His daughter. A gamble. I felt something tighten in my throat. I had spent my entire life trying to earn my father's approval, trying to appear capable enough to be taken seriously, trying to be worth his time, his praise, his investment. But in that moment, it was painfully clear. I had never been worth anything to him unless I benefited the image he sold to the world. My mother, seated beside him, tried to interject quietly. Chris, she's been accepted into an excellent program. Marketing business. She's not me, he snapped. I flinched. He softened his voice only slightly. She doesn't have my drive. My discipline. My focus. He said it as if listing clinical symptoms of a lifelong deficit. The truth was, I'd inherited plenty of his traits, including the stubborn ambition he always pretended was his alone. But he never cared to look close enough to notice that. When I asked why he had promised my brother Ryan he'd help with his tuition, my father waved a hand dismissively. Ryan has potential, he said. You have passion. It's not the same. My mother's eyes widened in horror. I felt my cheeks burn. I work, I said quietly. I get good grades. You try, he corrected. And that's fine. But trying doesn't guarantee a return. A return. A return on investment. My father had turned parenting into portfolio management. And I finally understood where I stood on his spreadsheet. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation I'd ever had with him. Every, maybe next year. Every, we'll see. Every, focus on being realistic. Every, that's not impressive enough. I realized something heartbreaking. My father only valued things that made him look powerful. Winning. Money. Prestige. Control. Influence. He understood competition, not compassion. He understood profit, not people. And he understood ambition only if he owned it. I had spent my whole life trying to prove myself to a man who would never place value on anything outside his own reflection. But that night, something inside me shifted. A quiet voice rose up and whispered, if he won't invest in you, invest in yourself. And so I did. I took out loans. I applied for scholarships. I worked part-time jobs between classes. I built a portfolio out of sheer caffeine and grit. And while my father dismissed me as the emotional child, the unfocused one, the soft one, I was slowly, steadily becoming the one thing he never expected. A woman capable of building something much bigger than his approval. During college, I made friends with tech students who hated marketing and loved coding, the kind of people who could build an app in a weekend but didn't know how to present it. We partnered on a project for fun. Then the project turned into a prototype. Then the prototype turned into a real startup. We named it Brightside, half jokingly, because we were all trying to find ours. But the more we worked, the more the idea grew. And the more the idea grew, the more money trickled in from investors who saw potential none of our families understood. By senior year, we were gaining traction. By graduation, we had offers. And 1 year after that, we sold. Not for millions. For 8 figures. My cut alone was $15 million after legal fees and taxes. More money than my father ever assumed I'd be near unless I married someone wealthy. But I didn't spend it. Not at first. Because money didn't change me. It clarified things. Money is a microphone. It amplifies who you already are. My father used money as a weapon. I would use mine as a mirror. Not to hurt him, but to show him the truth he refused to see. That he had underestimated the wrong daughter. I hadn't expected to use that money so soon. But life has a strange sense of timing. Because 6 months after our company sold, 6 months after I quietly became the wealthiest member of my family, my father's own company hit a crisis. A big one. A bad one. A scandal involving accounting irregularities and an executive who retired under suspicious timing. Investors spooked. The stock price dipped. Rumors of a hostile takeover spread. And for the first time in my life, my father looked small. He hid it well publicly, of course. But at home, my mother whispered about the long nights, the panic attacks, the desperation. His partner, Mark, messed up, she said during one hushed phone call. And there's nothing your father can do. He may lose everything. His partner, Mark. The same man who once told me at 14 that I'd turn out pretty if I tried harder. The same man who smirked every time he talked about my father's plans for my brother inheriting the company. The same man who had said to my father in front of me, "At least Ryan has a future. Your daughter will probably end up in some creative job that doesn't pay enough to buy coffee." I didn't forget that. Some wounds turn into memory tattoos. 2 weeks into the crisis, my mother called again, her voice soft. "Your father hasn't eaten all day," she whispered. "He's terrified someone is going to buy him out." My breath caught. "Wait," I said. "Can someone do that?" "Yes," she whispered. "His shares are vulnerable right now. If the right investor came in, they could take control of the company." I stared into nothing. Slowly, a single thought crystallized. A thought that felt electric. Dangerous. Beautiful. What if the right investor was me? I hung up the phone and sat very still. I thought about who I used to be. The girl who begged for tuition money, desperate for any sign of belief from her father. And then I thought about who I had become. A woman who no longer needed permission. A woman who no longer accepted limitations disguised as love. A woman with power. The quiet, strategic kind my father respected most. A woman capable of saving his company. Or buying it. Depending on how I wanted the story to end. I took a deep breath. Then I called my financial advisor. "Hi," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I want to make an acquisition." There was a pause. Of what size? I swallowed. My father's company. Another pause. Then, almost fearfully, "Rachel, are you sure?" I closed my eyes. "Yes," I whispered. "More sure than I've ever been about anything." He sighed softly. "Then let's begin." The weeks that followed were a blur of legal documents, negotiation strategies, investor buyouts, and confidential meetings in sleek glass offices. It turned out more than half of the existing board already resented my father's partner, Mark. They were willing to side with anyone who could stabilize the company. And I could. I had the capital. I had the advisors. I had the timing. My father had no idea what was happening. He didn't know that while he lost sleep fearing a stranger would take control, it was his daughter guiding the pen. He didn't know that the person negotiating with his weakest shareholders was me. He didn't know that the one person who had spent her entire life beneath his expectation was rising above it in real time. 3 months later, the papers were finalized. I acquired 51%. Majority ownership. The company was mine. Not my father's. Not his partner's. Mine. I sat alone in my apartment that evening, staring at the final signature page with trembling hands. It didn't feel like revenge. Not exactly. It felt like closure. My father had refused to invest in my education. But I had invested in myself. And now, the company he built was signed into my name. Not out of spite. Not out of cruelty. Out of capability. Out of power. out of the competence he never saw in me. The next morning, I requested a board meeting. I told them the truth. I was the new majority shareholder. I was stepping in to stabilize operations. I had long-term plans for innovation and restructuring. The board accepted me immediately. The CEO, my father, had no idea what was coming, and neither did his partner, Mark. But they were about to find out. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday at 9 a.m. I arrived early, wearing a deep navy suit that made me feel like someone capable of anything. Someone who had climbed alone. Someone who no longer needed permission to exist. When I stepped into the boardroom, several members greeted me warmly. My heart pounded. This was it. The moment everything in my life had been leading toward. At precisely 9 o'clock, the glass door opened. My father walked in, looking exhausted but determined. His partner, Mark, trailed behind him with his usual smugness, wearing a designer tie and a smirk that always made my skin crawl. They didn't see me at first. My father scanned the room, confused. "Where's the investor we're meeting with?" he asked one of the board members. The man smiled politely. "She's already here." My father frowned. "She?" His eyes traveled across the room. Then they landed on me. He froze. Confusion, shock, disbelief, panic, all flickered across his face like a reel of emotions he didn't know how to hide. "Rachel," he whispered. What are you doing here?" I folded my hands calmly on the table. "Chairing the meeting," I said. "Shall we begin?" His knees seemed to buckle slightly. Mark scoffed. "This is ridiculous," he said. "She's here for what? Emotional support." I turned my attention to him. "No," I said. "I'm here to address your termination." Silence detonated in the room. "What?" he sputtered. "My what?" My father's eyes snapped to me. "Rachel, you can't." "I can," I said, rising. "And I have." I slid the termination letter across the glossy table toward Mark. "As majority shareholder of this company," I said, "your position is no longer required. Effective immediately." Mark went red. "You can't fire me. Your father." "My father," I said, "does not own this company anymore." The room inhaled collectively. My father whispered, "What have you done?" I met his gaze. "Everything you told me I wasn't capable of." For a moment, the only sound in the boardroom was the ticking of the clock mounted on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. Mark's face turned crimson. "You can't do this," he shouted, slamming his palms on the table. "This is madness. You're just a kid." The board members stiffened. I stayed seated, calm, collected. Exactly the opposite of the emotional, unfocused, too soft daughter my father had always dismissed. "I'm 30, I said. "Not a kid. And I'm the majority shareholder. Your position is terminated. Security is waiting outside if you choose not to comply." His mouth fell open. "Chris," he barked, turning to my father. "Say something." My father didn't speak. Because he couldn't. He was staring at me the same way he had the first time I rode a bike without training wheels. Shocked, unsure, maybe even a little frightened by what I was capable of. "Dad," I said softly. "Sit down." He obeyed automatically. Like he finally understood I wasn't here to be his assistant or his shadow. I was here as the woman who owned his company. Security arrived quietly. Mark protested loudly. But his voice curved downward as the reality hit him. The man he'd belittled for years, the CEO who relied on him, no longer controlled his fate. I did. He was escorted out red-faced and sputtering. When the boardroom door closed behind him, silence fell again. Except this silence felt cleaner. Like a storm had passed. My father swallowed hard. "Rachel, how, when, why?" "Let's start with how," I said, sliding my acquisition documents across the table. He stared at the pages like they were written in fire. You bought out shareholders, he whispered. How did you convince them? With transparency, I said. With a stabilization plan. With a recovery strategy. With confidence. He blinked, stunned. You don't have that kind of money, he said. You couldn't have. I do, I said. Because someone else invested in me when you wouldn't. He leaned back as if struck. What are you talking about? I met his eyes directly. My startup, I said. The one you said was a waste of time. His face whitened. I sold it, I continued. For 8 figures. The room reacted quietly, a few raised brows, a few murmurs. But my father looked like he'd been pushed underwater. Why didn't you tell me? He whispered. Because you would have found a way to take credit. Because you would have turned my success into your talking point. Because you only value achievements that reflect back on you. I didn't say those things aloud. Instead, I said, you didn't ask. He closed his eyes. His voice was small. I didn't know. I felt a tightness in my chest. Familiar, painful, heavy. No, I replied gently. You never looked. A board member cleared his throat. Miss Morgan, what are your next steps for leadership restructuring? I straightened. Thank you, I said. First, I plan to remove outdated systems and implement accountability standards that should have been in place years ago. Several executives nodded vigorously. Second, I'll appoint a new CFO. Do you plan to remove the CEO as well? Someone asked tentatively. All eyes shifted to my father. He stiffened in his chair. This was the moment. The one I had imagined so many times. The moment I could deliver poetic justice, balanced perfectly on the edge of truth. I could fire him. I could humiliate him. I could give him the exact bitterness he'd served me when he refused my tuition. I looked at him. He looked at me. Fear flickered in his eyes. Real fear. That fear told me something no apology ever could. He finally saw me as someone powerful. Someone worthy. Someone capable of shaping his fate. Rachel, he whispered. If this is about the tuition, I'm sorry. But the apology wasn't right. Not yet. It's not about the tuition, I said softly. It's about your belief that I wasn't worth investing in. He flinched. Painfully. His voice broke. I was wrong. The boardroom was silent. The apology was real. Not polished. Not prideful. Not performative. Just a man looking at his daughter and finally seeing her clearly. I exhaled. No, I said quietly. I'm not firing you. He sagged in relief. But things will change, I continued. We're restructuring. Your power will be shared. Your decisions will be reviewed. And you will listen, really listen, to the people in this room. Especially me. He nodded immediately. Anything. Whatever you say. The board members exchanged impressed glances. I do want you to stay, I said truthfully. You're still good at what you do. But this company will no longer operate like an ego playground. That ends today. His eyes watered. My father, a man who had always treated emotion like weakness, was crying. Thank you, he whispered. For the first time, I heard gratitude instead of authority in his voice. It felt like a chapter closing. And a new one beginning. After the meeting adjourned, most of the board members shook my hand warmly. A few whispered, "Impressive work. You handled that beautifully. This company will be better under your leadership." But I barely heard them. My mind stayed fixed on the trembling way my father held his briefcase. When the room finally emptied, we were the last two standing. Just father and daughter. No titles. No shareholder stakes. No numbers. Just us. "Rachel," he said softly, "why didn't you tell me you built something so successful?" "Because you spent my whole life telling me I couldn't." He closed his eyes. "And you didn't want to prove me wrong?" he asked quietly. No, I said. I wanted to prove myself right. That seemed to break him. He sank into a chair. I was too hard on you, he admitted. I always thought I was pushing you to be better. No, I corrected. You were pushing me to be you. Tears spilled from his eyes again. I didn't realize I was hurting you. You didn't try to. He swallowed hard. You're incredible, he whispered. I should have seen it. His voice cracked again. I should have helped you. I nodded. Yes. You should have. He let out a shaking breath. But you didn't need me, I added. And that wasn't bitterness. It was truth. One he needed to hear. One I needed to say. You did this on your own, he said. Not because of me. In spite of me. I didn't deny it. Sometimes acknowledging the truth is the only way forward. We walked out of the building together in silence. The morning sun hit his face, and for the first time in my life, he didn't look invincible. He looked human. Can we start over? He asked quietly. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because the little girl inside me still carried bruises from years of being overlooked. Yes, I said finally. But this time, you'll meet me where I am. Not where you wish I'd stayed. He nodded. And for the first time ever, I believed he would try. 2 months later, the company was flourishing. Mark's absence stabilized morale. New financial systems restored investor confidence. Innovation increased. Collaboration skyrocketed. Even my father surprised me. He listened more. He asked questions instead of delivering lectures. He praised competence instead of doubting it. One day, during a strategy meeting, he said, "My daughter taught me something important. When you invest in people instead of assumptions, you get results." The room clapped. I felt my throat tighten. Not because I needed validation. Because he had finally learned the lesson I'd waited my entire life for him to understand. When my father refused to help with my tuition, I thought the universe was telling me I wasn't worth it. But the truth was simpler. People who can't see your value will never be the ones to help you rise. Your worth isn't determined by who invests in you. Your worth is determined by who you choose to become when no one invests in you. I didn't buy my father's company to humiliate him. I bought it so I could rewrite the story he wrote about me. The story where I was too emotional, too soft, too impractical, too naive, too underwhelming. That story is gone now. I'm not the girl who begged for tuition money. I'm the woman who built something powerful enough to save and reshape the empire he valued most. And now, he finally sees me. Not as a gamble. Not as a disappointment. Not as a failed investment. But as exactly who I am. A force he never saw coming. And a daughter who rose anyway. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.